Hello, Josh Spring from the Greater Cincinnati Homeless Coalition. So, figured we'd talk about some numbers, and actually that'll be most of what we'll talk about. So, you guys might remember over the summer we had a bit of a squabble with the city and the county and their desire to remove people to somewhere that were sleeping outside. And that resulted in at the behest of the mayor, the county prosecutor filing suit against the city of Cincinnati in order to reach a ruling from Judge Ruhlman that the city would be required to remove people from camps. And in fact, as we thought that it was made, and still is now, illegal to be without a home outside on public or private property within the entire county of Hamilton, the whole thing. And so...
Repeat that again.
So
it's illegal?
It is an arrestable offense in the entirety of Hamilton County to live outside on public or private property.
So homelessness is a crime.
Homelessness, yes. If you are seen outside, is the crime, yes. An arrestable offense. That is locally what's in place. Of course, that's morally wrong. It's also unconstitutional. And so we, along with folks living outside, filed suit against everybody at the county and everybody at the city, federal suit. And we are now waiting on Judge Black. Judge Black is probably about the best judge we could have pulled, so that's a good thing. And some of you may have seen a release we sent out that during kind of the height of this endeavor in the 9th Federal Circuit, a case out of Boise, Idaho, which is very similar to ours. In fact, it's almost the same. The decision there was that these actions are in fact unconstitutional, and in fact that they are a breach of the 8th Amendment, which is cruel and unusual punishment. That to be in a city that does not have enough access to living space for people, and then to say it is a crime to live outdoors, is cruel and unusual punishment. You know, you can't help but commit the crime. So we wager in our argument, certainly the 8th Amendment, and then we also wager a variety of others, including the 4th Amendment, which is right to due process. One example of that in this case is when the prosecutor wrote his filing for Judge Ruhlman to consider, and then Judge Ruhlman approved, it stated that camps posed a significant danger to the general public. Now, first of all, that seems redundant because people in camps are a part of the general public. So for us, they got that wrong from the start to separate us. But two, they said drug activity and hepatitis A and all this stuff. They didn't include any evidence of anything. Nothing, no evidence at all. So all of these people are accused of doing wrong with no evidence brought and no ability, because the defendant in the case, the way that it was contrived, the defendant in the case was the city, not the people. So also no chance to defend yourself against said claims. That's not constitutional. So there's more to it, but setting that aside for a minute, I thought it'd be useful to talk about numbers. So during that time when this was all in the press, you had in particular the, you can take one and pass it around, in particular the mayor of our city saying, you know, there's enough space for everybody. You know, there's no reason for somebody to be outside. And let me preface this by first saying that we hope in this case, so actually I'll back up, in the Ninth Circuit case and in other decisions in the past, where we've progressed as a movement nationwide is judges saying if there's not enough shelter space, then you can't threaten arrest, you can't criminalize. We'd like to progress it further beyond that to, ideally, you just can't do this, but the step before that is to have it based more on availability of housing and shelter, not just shelter, because the ultimate goal is housing, not shelter. So this, though, we needed to prove that in fact there is not enough space in our existing shelter system. And when you say this, sometimes what politicians try to do is put our member organization, shelter providers, in a really tough spot. So during all of this, the city manager and the mayor, you know, they're on the phone behind the scenes calling Shelter House, calling Bethany House and saying, we need you to take more people, and putting all this pressure on them when they're literally doing more than they can do. You know, they are already way above and beyond, all of them. And so this idea of trying to make it seem like we're blaming the problem on our member organizations, whereas in fact we know that with the resources that are currently made available, the $17 to $18 million that comes annually through the federally funded continuum of care, if we used it all exactly perfectly, it would not be enough. It doesn't. We always have to improve, but even perfectly, it wouldn't be enough. And so, what this chart shows, we got all of the recorded data that's reported to HUD regarding numbers of people in our shelter system, so that includes every type of shelter, family, single adult men and women, youth, etc. The number of open street outreach cases, so that's, when I say open street outreach cases, this is important to understand. So there's three different groups that do street outreach, that go and talk with people living outside in an attempt to assist that person in getting into a better situation. And a person on the street outreach list stays active for a period of 90 days without any contact. The reason for that is sometimes it's hard to stay in touch with people that are outside and are being moved around by the police and all this sort of thing. So 90 days. And in order to be on that list, so like the main outreach team, the PATH team through Greater Cincinnati Behavioral Health, they have their outreach office in our office. But if somebody who is sleeping outside comes in and meets with them and says, I'm sleeping under whatever bridge, that person is not at that point put into the system and end up on this list. It's not until the outreach worker is able to meet with that person at the location that they're sleeping with and can see that they're sleeping there. So that means that I would say the burden of proof to get on this list is too high, but it means that there is a high burden of proof to even end up on this list, which means we're missing people. And so let me just explain what this shows. we did this for every month. This is August. This shows an average day in the month of August. The lines that run across, so the yellow line that runs across this says 611 beds. That is the total number of beds that we have available in the system per HUD, per HUD's count, 611 beds. The only beds that excludes are a few beds that are specifically for veterans and a few beds that are specifically for women escaping human trafficking. The reason I excluded those is because it's such a specific group. Most people can't access it. The red line is another HUD number. So that is the bed capacity plus what HUD calls overflow capacity. So total of 680 available. So on a given day in August, in all of our shelters, there were an average of 697 people, which is greater than the overflow number, right? With that number, just the people in shelter were already past our capacity and we're past our overflow capacity. The line above are the street outreach cases. So 300 open cases for people living outdoors on an average day in August. Above that, where it says 102, so we have a triage phone line, the central access point. Primarily families with children can call to seek shelter, but also people seek shelter through City Gospel Mission and some other places there. So on an average day in August, 102 people were turned away by the cap line because there was no space. That 19 that shows up there, you might not even be able to read it. It says third-party calls for households seeking shelter. So what that is say, you know, I'm a social worker or I'm somebody's mother or aunt or friend, and I call for them. So I'm a third-party caller. And because of the way the data is gathered, third-party callers, unlike the rest of the data, are only recorded. It doesn't show the number of people in the household. So that 19 represents 19 households, which is certainly more than 19 people. The 196 number above. So if a family calls today seeking shelter and they're turned away because there is no space, and they don't call back tomorrow, it's safe to assume that they still need shelter tomorrow. And the fact that they didn't call back doesn't mean that something just worked out. So with that number, I'm attempting to account for that fact that people don't necessarily have access to call every day. And so that includes the number of people turned away in the previous 6 days. It does not duplicate anybody from the line below. And so that then gives a look at a week. It's just the assumption if you needed shelter a week ago, you probably still need it now. And probably that assumption could be 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but I thought that would be easily acceptable by people. And then above is the that same stat, but for those third-party callers. So, as you can see, the easily identifiable need, the folks that are literally known to be outside or are calling saying, I need shelter.
Judge, is that cap line, is that open 24/7?
No. No, the cap line, that's another good point. The cap line is, during the week, closes at 8 o'clock in the evening. On the weekend, it's open on Saturday 4 hours, Sunday 4 hours. So yeah, this only represents just a fraction of the week. That's a good point. So the easily identifiable need, and this rang true throughout the year, is about double the provision. You know, so the idea, the concept that we've got this well in hand, is just not true. It's false. And none of this isn't opinion. Right? These are numbers. These are numbers that we report to HUD. to the federal government. These are real numbers. And so, but again, so this is, we're using this data and the data from all of the months in the suit. I also will point out that on an average day in 2018, nearly 90%, I think maybe 89%, of families with children that called seeking shelter were turned away. Right? Nearly 90% on any given day were turned away. Yes. What happens to those families? I mean, scientifically, we don't know. Anecdotally, what happens is, I mean, it can be a variety of things. One example is both families and single adults, typically before they, if they're able to end up in shelter, have doubled up with people, with friends, whatever. And you double up with people you know and trust. And then as that expires, because the landlord says, you can't have that many people in here, or whatever it is, increasingly you double up with people that you don't know and you can't trust. And you might bounce from doubled up to bridge to car, with your families, with your kids in tow, if you have kids. And so you actually, I'll just give one example of what this could look like. We had moms with kids, in our office, living in their car, right, with their children, and reporting to us, I've been calling the captain line over and over and over and over again, and I can't get in. I'm outside with my kids in my car, and now I was already afraid that the state would come and try to take my